All right, everybody. Is there a Kia or a Rachel in this room? I don't think so. That's okay. We'll worry about getting your sheets and your stuff back after we do this. I want to get going with this because you guys are in for an absolute treat. I have to say this, and I don't mean to embarrass Jason in any way. There was a point in time a few years back when I saw this crazy TED Talk, this crazy guy, and I can't remember where I ran across it, but I was almost in tears because of what like the message meant. Like when you said, there's one point in the TED Talk where he says, he shows the picture of all the interchanges. And he says, like, what are we leaving behind? Like, what will the people who dig this place up thousands of years from now think we were based on what we have left behind? And it was one of those like insights that just struck me right here. Like, it was like, oh, that's it. And then, and I'm not gonna, there's a point in that TED Talk where it like culminates in like, and we did this. And I just remember like sitting at my desk going, damn right you did. Yes. and just feeling like this overwhelming, like, yeah, that was awesome. And that's probably the TED Talk that I have shared the most with people over the years. I remember when I went to Dallas once and I got invited to go out to eat with Jason. And I remember sitting across the table, and it was one of those surreal moments that you have every now and then. Like, I'm sitting here with a guy who is one of my heroes. And we become friends since. And, you know, becoming friends means that, you know, in a way you start to know someone a little bit deeply, and that like godlike veneer starts to wear off a little bit because now you've slept in the similar rooms and, you know, gone out late at night and talked. But my deep admiration and really like respect for the work that Jason Roberts is doing has never diminished, and if anything has grown and grown and grown. In fact, when we set the schedule and started putting this on, we never asked him to come here. And there was a point in time when they called and said, your team called and said, hey, we see you're in Tulsa. Would you be interested in having Jason come? And my immediate reaction was that scene from Wayne's World, like, we're not worthy. And I'm like, of course we would. I just never, I know your schedule's so busy. I'm like, I didn't want to ask because I didn't want to impose on a friend, like, you know, you have a duty to come up here and do this for us. Jason's here from the Better Block. They gave me your bio to read. I'm just going to do a couple highlights. This is my favorite one. You're the founder of the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, which is the greatest. That's the greatest title, I think, of the whole thing here. Founder of the original Better Block, co-founder of Art Conspiracy, Bike Friendly Oak Cliff, and a candidate for U.S. Congress. One of my favorite pictures of you is standing with my former congressman, James Oberstar, who's from my district, and you and him standing there side by side. I thought that's a really cool juxtaposition. The Better Block has grown and grown and grown. Jason's going to talk a little bit about the Better Block Foundation and now some of the amazing work that they're doing. I want to say that they become an international movement featured in New York Times, Dwell Magazine, TED Talks, NPR. Team Better Block was showcased in the U.S. Pavilion at the 2012 Venice Biennial. The excitement that I have for the work that Jason's doing is immense. And so please, please, please give a warm welcome to my friend, Jason Roberts.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. It is wonderful to be here. This is probably the third or fourth time I've been to Tulsa, so this has been great. And many of you who have maybe seen me speak before here know that my family is actually from Oklahoma. We're Okies. I'm a Boomer Sooner in Dallas, Texas, which is a rare thing. I get a lot of ostracization in my neighborhood for that. Yeah, it's in fact, and I'll talk and some of those, Chuck mentioned the TED Talk, and you'll see a few of those slides. I'll talk about that. But one of the big inspirations for me in the work was in Oklahoma. and looking at the small rural towns where my family was from, with 500 people where my mom was from and 2,700 people where my father was from, in Fletcher and Surreal, which is the southwest side of Oklahoma, and seeing their main streets and seeing them boarded up, and then walking through those and just hearing their stories of, that's where Joe the barber was, and that's where Judy was the beautician, and this is where my dad was a mad scientist as a kid, and so the pharmacist would give him chemicals so he can make rocket fuel, and it was highly illegal, but this is a small town, and this is what you could do. So, and then you talk about the parades and all of those things, and I thought, I didn't get those things. I had a Safeway grocery store chain at the end of my street with like a Little Caesars and a high school kid working there that did not want to be there at all. And so I didn't hear these little stories. We didn't have parades. We didn't have all of those things. So really getting to hear the passion and the dreams of my dad and my mom talking about what their neighborhoods were like, and asking the questions, well, why don't we still have that, is really the foundation for the work I do. I will talk though about the fact that, first of all, I am not from, and Chuck, I think it's funny, he's from an engineering background, but we're not really urbanists or architects. Actually, I spend my days in rooms that look like this mostly, cold air conditioning rooms full of wires and cables. I would have been the guy setting up your AV projector. I was not the person that was supposed to go work on your cities. In fact, during the day, I was this kind of boring, no social life person. My one cool factor was night, I played in rock bands. Right? And that's something that Chuck and I actually share. He's a drummer. So one of these days we talk, because we actually end up kind of being in the same places somewhat semi-regularly. And we said, one of these days we're going to have a drum set and guitar. We're just going to have a show. So there will be an urbanist convention at some point with a rock show. But a lot of the inspiration, though, was also looking at the timeless form of places. So getting to take traveling was really big. Obviously going to Europe, seeing places like Rome, seeing places in Paris that were full of life. Thousands of years old, still working, young people, old people, markets, going to Holland and seeing grandparents riding bicycles with grandkids. Understanding that there were these small buildings that were aligning these streets that constantly had these new businesses that were recycling with different generations in these spaces, and understanding that there were a scale that they could continue to reactivate. Seeing those places and then trying to understand, like, well, what is it that we're building in our neighborhood that's got this legacy like this? Like Chuck mentioned, this is the slide he's talking about. The one thing I came back home and I saw a lot of, though, which was our legacy, was this. And we're spending billions of dollars on this. And I remember thinking, like this is our lineage. This is our heritage. Like, I have nowhere to sit and ride a bicycle. I can't show the fountain that I saw in these other places. I can't talk about the markets we went to here. This is just a space that we traverse through. And everything, as you guys probably know, on the edge of this does not work as well. So we're destroying things around us, all for one purpose. So I started going to my city hall and started figuring out, look, I want to get involved. I want to see if I can make a difference, because I'm seeing these other things from around the world. How can we make change in our own communities? And when I talked to the city, they said, that's great. You want this kind of Parisian cafe experience and this walkable lifestyle with people playing accordions everywhere and eating crepes. But this is Dallas, and it's 100 degrees outside, and it's a car culture as well. So we just don't do that, which I thought was interesting. I didn't necessarily get on an airplane and land in Paris, and all of a sudden I started realizing, man, I'm really craving an espresso and sitting outside. Like we've all desired these kind of spaces, right? But they were saying, but the good thing is, though, we are doing planning, right? We're doing lots of plans. We've got a forward Dallas plan. We're talking about the future of Dallas and what that will look like. We've got 1985 bike plans that never got implemented that you can go look at. We've got downtown Dallas 360 plans that talk about the 360 planning of Dallas. We've got 2035 mobility plans. So I'm looking at all this thing like, wow, Dallas is going to be great in 2035. I hope we make it, right? So I realized it's going to be hard for me to kind of start getting things to happen at the city hall level, the planning level, because that was the processes that we were going through. And I was in this idea of like, well, these things are saying you can have a great place in 20 years. And I was trying to figure out, how do we have great places in 20 days, right? So the first project I worked on was we had an old theater in my neighborhood. And just so you guys know a background on my neighborhood, it's called Oak Cliff. It's on the southwest quadrant of downtown Dallas. It was a former streetcar suburb, built roughly 1888 on. But this theater was kind of emblematic for, like, we were thought of as the bad side of town. We had a stigma in our community. In fact, to this day, we still are trying to overcome that stigma. The joke is, when you tell people you're from Oak Cliff, you hear the Oak Cliff O. So you say, I'm from Oak Cliff, and people say, oh. They associate it with gang violence and blight and all kinds of things. So, but at the center, at the core of the historic downtown on the main street is this old theater, which we talk about as being ground zero for our stigma. This is where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the theater had, but at the time when I started getting involved with it, had been closed for 10 years. There was a fire. A good friend of mine named Manny Anderson was trying to raise $3 million in order to get to have the balcony fixed, to add new seats, all of these things. So I went into this space. In fact, the only reason it has a sign is because Oliver Stone made that sign for the movie JFK. And you could see that birds were pecking away at it with time as well. So I remember thinking, I don't have millions of dollars, but I want to do something in this space right now. So I thought, I've got a lot of friends I can bring into the mix. And again, I was in rock bands, so I had a big arts community. So got together with my close friend, Sarah Jane, Simrod, and said, like, what would happen if we brought in 100 artists and we had them all paint on easels the night before, and the next day we'll open it up and turn this into an instant giant art gallery, and we'll sell all the artwork and give it to a good local cause. So what we did was we set in the theater, kind of building our easels. And then just to note, at the time, right after we were about to open the doors, we started thinking, like, this is probably going to be an abject failure. This theater's been closed for 10 years. It's the middle of winter. We're in the bad side of town. But what happened when we opened the doors was we had 700 people show up. We sold every piece of art that we had created the night before. But beyond that, we had people coming up to us saying, like, we were waiting for someone to open the doors to this theater and make it work again. And I thought, I was waiting for this as well. And I realized that we are all waiting for someone to stand up and actually start fixing these places. We all want these things to work again. We just don't know where to get started. All I was able to do with our little community was give them permission and say, well, start here. And that's the genesis of a lot of this work. But beyond that, too, is understanding that the way we fix things is when we co-create things together. There's a great quote from a guy named Jaime Lerner who says that, you know, if you want innovation, take a zero away from your budget, which is what we had our zeros just completely taken away at this point. But how do you get things done whenever you take zeros away from your budget? You start managing the equation of co-responsibility. And that's what we did. 100 people had one little piece of this theater and helped bring it back to life again. So in short order, I started showing up to the board meetings of the theater and said, hey, I want to take part. Within 3 months, I was the president of the Texas Theater. So I tell you, be careful when you say, hey, I want to help. We started doing a lot of little things, though, to make it work. At that point, so again, still didn't have money, but it wasn't a theater. In fact, it was being made for Broadway shows, for plays, not for movies. So we went and found a screen in our friend's backyard. We hung it up. And we didn't have a sound system for a while, so we found pianos on Craigslist, brought them in. We had our neighbors play pianos, and we went through the entire catalog of Charlie Chaplin. After we had done that, we had raised enough money to get a sound system. And then we started showing movies. And then after that, people started seeing from the outside what we were doing. We had people that actually loved theater start getting involved and wanted to take part. Now, if you go to the theater, it's an anchor and it's working. It's working well. And there's these great guys that run this and love this space. All right, so thinking like, wow, if I can help fix a theater with my neighbors, what else can we go take on? Started looking at old maps in my library, right? These are maps from the 1920s, looking at the neighborhood and how it was laid out. And if you look at these maps, along all these bold black lines are these clusters of zero lot line Main Street style buildings nestled throughout my neighborhood. And I looked at those and I thought, okay, this is interesting. What were those? Because the interesting thing, these black bold lines are like, my theater was there, right? It had 650 seats and 35 parking spaces. So how did that work? Those black bold lines were our old trolley line. We had a streetcar system that ran throughout Oak Cliff. So I started looking at all these areas that looked beautiful. It had those old Main Street forms that I liked, like the old towns in Oklahoma that I saw. And I thought, well, you know, as I started talking to people about ways we can get things happening in our area, how do we get more businesses here? How do we get people coming out and having a street life and all those things? I said, I've got a great idea. Let's bring back the streetcar system. People said, it's crazy. You can't bring back a streetcar, a trolley system. They don't come back. It's been gone for half a century. It'll take millions of dollars. I knew very little about streetcars or trolleys, but I was a web guy. I knew how to make websites. I went home that night and I made a fake website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. It looked really official. It had boards and news and histories. I had pictures of Dutch trams on the front. I wanted to make it look like one of those engineering sites you saw, right? And I had a lot of people calling me in my neighborhood and be like, wow, we got a transit authority? This is great. And the next week, the Dallas Morning News had a story saying, dreaming of the day the streetcars return. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. But there were no other members. But people called me, though, and said, hey, what can I do to take part? And in short order, my neighborhood of these people that everyone had counted out in the city, I had a guy who was a civil engineer said, hey, you know, I'm going to donate time for a feasibility study. I had another guy that lived up the street from me that turned out to be one of the most foremost streetcar authorities in the nation. He had enough parts in his garage to build a streetcar. So we formed a legitimate nonprofit. So we're starting this advocacy organization. So we're going to get this rolling, but I'm thinking this is going to take me 20, 30 years. In fact, I went to Portland. I met with the people that started their streetcar system. They said it took us a minimum of 15 years. It'll be at least 15 years, if not longer, because it's a lot easier. We're far more progressively minded on infrastructure projects than probably Dallas is. So I thought, okay, let's just put our heads down. We'll keep working on this. And maybe whenever I'm 70 years old, we'll get a streetcar. So in the meantime, let's start working on, maybe we work on like bike initiatives. But the reality for me, I found out whenever we talked about bicycling in Dallas, it wasn't what I saw like when I saw in Europe, which was pretty girls in dresses and guys in suits riding old heavy bikes. When we bicycled in Dallas, what we did is we like to wear lots of spandex. We'd start doping and we go for 300 miles, right? That's how we bicycle. I thought that's not really my style. So I realized, okay, maybe what we need to do is start our own organization like the streetcar group. We'll call it Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. We'll all gather together and we'll take our old Schwinn's out of the garage and ride to the grocery store together, right? And I found out as I started advocating with this group saying like, we'll start promoting the idea of getting bike infrastructure. And I found out we're the guy that goes to City Hall and says, hey, I've got this great idea. We'll take every street in our city, we're gonna cut them in half and put bike lanes everywhere. You have a lot of people that look like this come out and say, no, no, you're not. So I realized that guy was probably not gonna be a cyclist anytime soon. And it was hard for me to kind of win him over. So I thought, well, let's just start having fun events and parties and celebrating the lifestyle behind this. And one of the things I talk about too, and I tell people to this day, I don't even feel like I'm an urbanist. I hear that a lot because I think that scares a lot of people. They hear the word urbanist, they think cities, they think Shanghai, and they think people live in tin cans. I love rural communities as well. That's not, you can't use that urbanist kind of connotation. I think what in the end, we're all humanitarians. We're trying to create places that are more humane for ourselves, for our parents, for our children. And understanding that if we can relay the lifestyle that we want to create, all that other good stuff we want, the form and all that stuff comes out of those things. So started getting together with this group of friends and said, okay, let's promote our first event. We'll do a giant history tour. What we'll do is we'll all follow the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald because we had nothing else to celebrate in my neighborhood. We thought maybe 25 people will show up to this ride, right? But what happened when we told everyone to meet at the Grassy Knoll, which is where you meet for your Lee Harvey rides, we had 150 people show up. And what you don't see is me looking terrified at the front of this line, because first of all, I didn't own a bike when we started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I just like the idea of having a bike culture. But I also was thinking, I'm not a leader. I should not be leading a movement. That's not who I am. But I found out if you're passionate about something, you have everything it takes to become a leader. And that's what people are looking for, someone to stand up and take a charge so they can get behind and fight for things. So after that, we started doing a lot of little projects in our neighborhood. How do we get like kids riding bicycles? When I was a kid in the 80s, 50% of us rode our bikes to school, if not more. We all rode our bikes. Now, at my kids' school, nobody was riding bikes. Zero. Not one, not five, zero kids. There weren't bike racks at the school. I remember, and Chuck, you probably remember this, in the day, you get on your BMX that was all beat up, you rush in. We didn't wear helmets. That was not a thing. And we would jump off the bike and we let it rush into the bike parking. And we'd rush off into class. And so they never got the thrill of that, which was so much fun. So we thought, okay, let's see if I can get kids to ride bicycles again. This is the other interesting thing when I asked the neighborhood, like, how old are your kids when they're riding bicycles or they're learning to ride bicycles? 12, 13. I thought, man, when I was 4 or 5, that's when we started riding bikes. And this was freedom. This is what you wanted to do. So we started making punch cards and said, look, we'll make punch cards. And if kids start riding school every day for 5 days, at the end of a week, we'll all go get root beer floats together. We went from 0 kids riding bicycles within 5 days having 100 kids riding bicycles. Beyond that, though, we had a lot of people come out and started saying their kid brothers and kid sisters, younger ones, well, that they want to learn to ride now. They all, and we started seeing this kind of culture develop, and people are looking forward. Now this event it's really big. It's called I Bike Rosemont. The fire department comes out, the police department, everyone's riding together. There's 300 kids out. It's crazy. It's a lot of fun. And it was only punch cards. And we went from being the worst city for bicycling in the entire nation, the worst nation by Bicycling Magazine, the leading authority, right? With no bike infrastructure, no bike lanes at all, partially because our bicycle coordinator was vehemently opposed to bike lanes, which was a whole other story. This is the first bike lane ever in our city, brought back in our city, I should say, because we had some in the 70s that they started, they took away. And so the interesting thing is I me and my friend David designed this bike lane. Again, I wasn't an urban planner or architect. So it was this interesting reality of that, like, wow, if you just start standing up and showing up and saying that we want to fight for these things, you can actually get things on the ground. The other thing is we weren't the bike part of town. We just kept telling people we were the bike part of town. And it's funny how it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. People come to the neighborhood and there's bike lanes. I guess I'm supposed to buy a bike now. And there's all these parties everyone's throwing around here. And in short order, we were able to kind of game that system. All right, so talked about theaters and talked about streetcars and bicycles. Started looking at the blocks of buildings, right? This is the old streetcar stops I told you about. Looking at these and trying to figure out, well, how do you make these work again? What's holding these places back? Why aren't they working? And realized that we had done a lot of things to hurt these spaces over time, to make them not places that you gather. Because in the end, I just wanted to get on a bicycle and go get a cup of coffee somewhere. You couldn't do that on this street because first of all, it was zoned as light industrial, which meant, and I didn't know what urbanism was or any planning code or anything. I just knew I couldn't have a cup of coffee, right? The streets in the 70s were turned to one-way, high-speed streets to get people out of here, actually, to get to the suburbs and to the highways. Now, and so we changed the zoning. We also made it harder to open anything here because you didn't have enough parking spaces, right? Then we created all these ordinances and rules over time. You don't have to read all these, but just know we either made it illegal or cost prohibitive that these places work again. So if you wanted flowers on the sidewalk, it was going to be $1,000 in permitting. If you wanted to have awnings over the windows because it can get hot, each window was going to be $1,000 in permitting. Street cafes, $1,000 per year in permitting times area times market value times 85% times 12%. It's illegal for merchandise to be on the sidewalk. So those cool book stalls I saw in Paris, those can't happen. Bicycles out front of bike shops can't happen. Clothes out in front of an old kind of vintage clothing shop can't happen, right? And then if you really want to kill your street life, create a law that says it's illegal for crowds to gather on the sidewalk. And all those rules were from 1941. I remember going to the city and asking, well, why are we doing all these things? I'm like, I don't know, but you just have to kind of follow these rules. So we looked at it and thought, okay, it's obviously illegal for us to do anything to make this come to life. So what would happen if we took a weekend and we broke every law we possibly could? So that's what we did. We painted our own bike lanes. We added our own cafe seating. We brought out historic lights to reline the streets. We put murals on the buildings, and we took the empty buildings. We put the businesses we wish always had. So coffee shops and flower shops and bookstores. We took old car garages and turned them into art galleries with kids. Then we printed off the laws and the rules we were breaking, and we invited our city staff and our mayor out and said, come out to our better block. And they came out and said, I don't know if we're supposed to be here. We thought we're all going to jail, but it's going to be that scene from Elvis Presley, Jailhouse Rock. It's going to be really cool. But we didn't go to jail. They came back and they said, this is much better. This is a way the streets should work. These places should be active. They should be vibrant. We were doing a land use study at the time that was very adversarial. But what happened after our project, they were able to use this and say, this is what we're trying to do with our streets. We passed the zoning unanimously at that point to change the streets, to make them back into retail streets again. All of those fees got changed. So $1,000 for cafe seating went to $100. So now it was actually, it was advantageous for us to start doing these things in our communities. All right, people said, that's great though, you did that was in April, it's really nice outside, and people will go outside in April, but in Texas it gets 100 degrees 4 months out of the year. So I thought, let's try this again when it's 100 degrees outside, right? This is the end of August. And we started looking at these streets and we said, okay, another area, streetcar stop, kind of wide streets. I got no sidewalks on one side, broken up sidewalks on the other side. I've got a pole with nothing on it, just this gray ugliness. And so what we did is, how do we make this more humane in an environment people want to linger in 100 degrees? We brought out 42 trees. We brought out 100 bushes to create pedestrian islands. Pedestrians would feel safe crossing the street. We took old pallets from the trash. We made decks so people could sit outside. We painted around crosswalks. You're not supposed to do that. We added bicycles to the pole, because again, we're the bike part of town. And then we put tables under the trees, and people stayed for hours. In fact, they would not leave. And it was frustrating because, we're like, hey, we want to go home at this point. We've been working on this project, and trying to get this stuff happening. And we did these really quick. The crazy thing was that after this is all over, at the end of the night, we peeled everything up. And people had never been here before, started driving back the next weekend. They're like, there's a great place. It's right around here. There's all these trees and tables, and I keep missing it. So it's like Oz. And I show this picture as an example of what we were able to create as a community, but also to let you know that we had seen so many architects come through our neighborhood and give us renderings of how great our community could be, that we all started suffering from what we called rendering fatigue. We stopped believing it could ever happen. And so the amazing thing is, this is not a rendering. Those are real trees. They're not Photoshop trees. Those are real crosswalks, real bikes from the neighborhood in 100 degrees bicycling to the area, because it's much easier to bicycle there than to find parking. People also ask me about breaking all those laws and rules. What happens when you do that? This is my friend Scott, who helped me print laws and rules we're breaking. Scott's now our city council member. So I found there's a one-to-one correlation between breaking laws and becoming a public servant. All right, so we started looking at like, how do we get other things in the neighborhood? We had a group that wanted to do a dog park. My friend Robbie Good came to me. He said, like, we've been trying to get a dog park for a while. We talked to the city, our elected official, our city council member. She went to city staff. City staff looked in their books and said, okay, we need 3 contiguous acres of land, which we had no idea why that was a thing. And then we'll have to do studies, and it's going to be millions of dollars and take years. And so we thought, okay, we don't have 3 contiguous acres of land in our inner city neighborhoods to give for a dog park. This group came to us, and they were going to give up. They were frustrated and said, I guess this is not going to happen. What did you guys do? And I said, well, we're standing across from this field that had been, that was an overgrown, a median at this point that was really wide, that people were throwing trash in. And said, well, why don't we just make that into a dog park? They said, that's great. We'll get together. We'll have a bunch of meetings. We'll raise some money. In 6 months, maybe we'll do a little dog park. And I said, well, why don't we just do it next weekend? So that's what we did. We added our own fencing. We put mulch in the area. We put swings out. We made fake copies of all the city's park signs and made our own signs. And people came out and they said, this is great. We'd much rather have these things. The city council member, Delia Hasso at the time, came back and she did a proclamation saying, let's allow this to happen. So we got an award for breaking rules on this project. And since that time, we've actually had other groups do pop-up dog parks in the area to get these things happening. This is a group in South Dallas that started one to get the first dog park. I'll skip past that. We'll go into kind of what the big initiative was for us in our community, realizing that, first of all, the city of Dallas's motto was think big. And the frustration for us was that meant that what we're going to do is spend millions of dollars to maybe build a convention center or hotel, or we're going to bring out a Spanish architect and build a bridge that looks like a fish bones. And maybe that's going to like be $150 million. And that's going to make all these cool little things happen, these great little blocks. And I thought, well, why don't we start with those little places? Because those are the places that I love, whether I'm in Paris or London or New Orleans or Austin or in Tulsa. There are these little blocks that have 100 little things that I love. Little lighting, great little sidewalks, sandwich board signs, cafes, a local pub, restaurants. They've got pocket parks, dog parks. They've got clocks. They've got directories. And I thought as a community, we can build 100 little things so much faster than we do that one big thing that we hope will create those little things. We found out we can use little things from the store really to start changing the way people see the built environment. First of all, I found out that white duct tape looks a lot like thermoplastic paint that the city uses to paint stripes on the ground. We found out that you can use straw walls that you use in construction zones to create new curbs. So cars won't go straight and fast, but they'll make these curvilinear motions, and that way, or these serpentine motions, and we'll slow down so people will linger outside and we can landscape those. We take the wraps off of city buses, and we can make those into crosswalks. And then we can go into a weekend. We can take a city block in our neighborhood, and we can say, hey, we want to fix this block. It's too wide. It's too fast. And they'll say it's going to take us, 20 years and millions of dollars. We say we'll just do it ourselves like this. So, and the interesting thing is this street actually is now converted to a two-way street in our neighborhood. They've used this project as an example of why they were able to get it changed in the area. So it's these little projects that were done with the neighborhood using things that you can find at Home Depot that maybe cost a total of $200 as a neighborhood can dramatically change people's perception of a space. People also ask me, how do you get by with breaking all those rules and laws in broad daylight? And I said, I found I can break any law you want as long as you wear an orange vest. I show this image a lot, and this is something that I love. And this is an area in Paris called Montmartre. The restaurant's called La Maison Rose. Anyone who's been there has probably seen it. It's fairly iconic. And I remember when I first saw this image thinking, man, I wish this was in my neighborhood. If it were there, I would go here every single day. I want to retire here. I'd have a cup of coffee with my friends. I'd hang out here. I asked other friends, what do you think about places that look like this? And they said, we wish we had it as well in our neighborhood. I would have my kids work here. We put it on our postcards. I thought, well, if we all agree we wish we had more places that look like this, then why do we keep building places that look like this? And that was the big reality of when you create places that look like this, you're putting the same energy it takes to build the other things, but you're making something that people don't care about. It's something that's cold. It actually makes you feel less humane. It's an environment that you're not going to celebrate. It's going to be torn down in 20 years. You're not going to think twice about it. If we're putting the energy into making places, why aren't we making the places that inspire us? The places that we're going to put on postcards, the places that we're going to fight for. I also started learning, this is an interesting aside, I had a conversation with an architect in Scotland. And in our work, we've been very fortunate to go all around the world. In fact, 2 months ago, I was in Africa doing projects in Malawi, and then before that, we have got projects in Copenhagen and Perth. It's been surreal based on this work. But one of the conversations I had when I was doing a project in Scotland was with an architect, and I was telling her about kind of getting interested in form and understanding this, because again, my background was in urban planning, but I'm sure the conversations you guys have had about human scale and things like that. And she said, you know, and I said, the places that we love have these kind of small pathways, these small streets, and they end up having these buildings that are kind of close together that create this great form. And she said, well, scientists have known that for a long time. Humans are animals that have this response called thigmotaxis. In fact, thigmotaxis is basically this thing that tells us like we like to be close to walls. We're edge clinging creatures. In fact, that we know it so well that scientists, when they're testing out medicine, antidepressant medicine or anti-anxiety medication on rats, to see if it works, they'll load a rat up with this medication. If it moves away from the wall into this open space where they feel vulnerable, they know it's working. So all that means is it takes a lot of Prozac to be cool with places that look like this. I also started trying to figure out people that I could be inspired by that were doing work, that were making things happen and making things happen fast, because it was hard to find that in the world of urban planning and city making. When I look back in history, you could find a lot of interesting examples of things happening quickly. One of the stories I loved was about Napoleon. And maybe people don't know this, but Napoleon, he, of course, was exiled to the island of St. Helena. But he was exiled actually a time before this, and Chuck will like this because he's a history freak as well. But to an island called Isle of Elba in Italy. And the fascinating thing about the Isle of Elba, so he gets caught in his first beef. This is before Waterloo. The British send him there, and they're like, we're going to give you sovereignty over this island. You can have it. There's 30,000 inhabitants that are in abject poverty. Good luck with that. So he looks around, and out of boredom and out of concern for the quality of life of the inhabitants, he starts realizing, okay, first of all, your agricultural methods are in the Dark Ages. We're going to upgrade those. So he upgrades their farming methods so they can make better bread. He's like, you know what, your curriculums for schools are outdated. Those are in the Dark Ages. He updates those. He realizes that they don't have any resources that they're using in order to generate wealth. So he finds out they used to be iron mines on the island back in prehistoric times. So not prehistoric times, but back in the Iron Ages. That would have been very interesting when the dinosaurs were making iron tools. So he finds these, and then he's like, okay, so he gets iron mining happening again. So now they're generating revenue in the area. Then he decides to make an army. Then lastly, he makes a navy, and he gets himself off the island and becomes Emperor of France again. And he does it all in 300 days. So it shows you how fast, if somebody who's got an idea and can make things happen, and can organize these disparate things into an order and make things happen, things can happen really, really quickly. All right, so our work, so you know, I started off, we have Team Better Block, which is a for-profit. My friend Andrew Howard runs that. I run now the nonprofit that we started called the Better Block Foundation. That was really based upon, we started seeing all these better blocks happen around the world. We wanted to create more tools and resources to help those, as opposed to just doing consulting as well on our own projects. And so the first project we started kind of working with the community on to really kind of understand what it is that we're doing and try to create more tools and resources for them to continue this work was a project we did in Akron, Ohio. This is a community that's largely Italian immigrants, and so refugees from Bhutan had been moving into the area. So the interesting thing is Akron, Ohio is suffering from depopulation, much like Detroit. In fact, it is kind of the sister city to Detroit because Detroit made the cars, Akron made the tires. So Goodyear was here, BF Goodrich, all those folks were headquarters here. They all pulled out, right? And so now they've got excess infrastructure, they've got gaps in the teeth, they've got empty buildings. So we looked at that, and we went to the community and we said, okay, how can we start making these places work again? How do we start changing the scale? How do we start introducing ideas that were based upon the things that you wish you had in these spaces? So we made maps, and first of all, let's crunch it down the street. So we'll go ahead and add great bike infrastructure like we're seeing around the world. We can take the empty buildings and we can businesses with the neighborhood. So we got Bhutanese people in the neighborhood. Let's do Bhutanese restaurants. We'll do it. We'll go in and create a welcoming center, international welcoming center to do housing placement for this community. We can take the empty fields. We can study Italian piazzas and try to recreate those. We create workshops in the neighborhoods, and we do workshops now all the time. These are all 2-hour workshops because I found that you can pretty much only get about 2 hours of people's time because everyone is so busy. So what we do is like, how do you make it irresistible for people to come together in a short amount of time, and realizing even those 2 minutes when they first show up, recognizing it's so important to make sure they feel like they're included and they can do something. Otherwise, they're going to stand around and feel like I'm not important, they'll leave. So I've got 2 hours to grab them and hopefully entice them into transforming their space. And hopefully what we're going to create is going to be so compelling, they're going to realize that they can make any kind of change in their neighborhood. So we'll say, come out on a Saturday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. We're going to make bike lanes. We're going to do water features from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, or we'll do bike lanes from 10 to 12 on Friday. We work with city crews as well, and we can fill up their machines with kids' tempura finger paint. We work with the neighborhood, and this is in 2 hours. We're laying out white duct tape to create those edges. And this is 2 hours later, bike lanes in use, just like the ones you see in Portland right? And we line them with shade trees. We can then go on and make mid-block crossing using the scraps from buses as well. We can take these empty fields from those parking lots or these gaps in the teeth. These spaces have been empty for 50 years. We'll get some dirt, some hay bales, study some Italian piazzas, and make our own Italian piazza. So, and then we can line it with a market on the edge because we know the basic principles behind what makes a market work. And we know what makes piazzas work. This is old hat. These is old recipes that we all know. That was my frustration because I wasn't an urban planner. I thought these are just classic things. In fact, the Spanish had already dialed this in with a process you guys may know called the Law of the Indies. Whenever they stamped a new city, they started with the plaza, they created the church that faced the waterway or faced wherever the enemy was coming, and they created the market to create taxable income in the area so they could build out the rest of the streets. They did this in a certain form that we still see in cities today that is still working. New Orleans has got it, Santa Fe has got it, it's in Mexico City, it's in Peru. This is something that they studied the Persians. In fact, this form is from, you'll see this on a Persian rug as well. It's called charborg. It's 4 different quadrants. So all we did was just look at old recipes, right, of things that were working and recreated them again. Made bocce ball courts with the Italian community out of a turn lane. We could take pallets and make decks so people could sit outside in the neighborhoods. Take buildings that were slated to be demolished, actually, and make them into businesses. And this is the block actually being used. So 2 hours prior to this, it looked like the barren, gray, cold street. All of those people smiling and waving and all were all helping build this just a few hours earlier. And now with our nonprofit, we're able to create a series of all these, our recipes online. We've had these up on our website so you guys can make your own bike lanes, make your own piazzas, make your own cafe seating elements. There's other examples of projects that we can do. We can take motor banks and take materials in the area and make them into main streets again. And so people can use them and show how they make them more humane. We can take, this was another side of the bank. We'll take the front, again, a wide gray street. This is Akron again. They said we just have tires and paint. So we just use tires and paint. And we made it into a piazza in a couple hours. Vinyl that we use all the time in order to make slides for kids so they could actually have these play structures in the area. This is tires again, Akron. They had a ton of them, so we made it into play facilities. This is in Detroit, working with Maurice Cox, who's the head of the planning department for Detroit. We do a lot of work in Detroit, a lot of work in Akron. Actually, we're all over the Midwest and the East Coast. I would say that's where most of our work is right now, and a little bit in California. But Maurice Cox had never, ever actually designed or ever painted a bike lane himself. This is the first one he ever got to do. We find all kinds of tools and resources. This is funny. Back in Detroit about a year and a half ago, I was looking for ways to quickly put poles up so people could actually, so we have delineators in the space. I found out they said it was gonna be $30 to use the official one, so I used toilet plungers and PVC pipe. And you guys may have seen an article that came out, 3 months ago in Wichita, Kansas. That was my friends did that. So they're like, great idea. So anyways, so these ideas spread pretty quickly. And so these are all recipes that we have online. You can see all of these things. This is this community actually using these here. This is seniors in the neighborhood that are actually getting a chance to kind of ride through their blocks as well. This is also Detroit. We did a project where we did 5 miles of bike lanes in a span of 5 days in Macon, Georgia. So this is the kind of the community we worked together on this project. We've gotten really good at making bike lanes really quickly in areas. This was a plaza that wasn't working. They're trying to figure out how do we make it work again. We just bought about 20 tons of sand and made it into a beach. This is it at night. So one of the big things I found out too that was important for our work to make places work, because again, people aren't urbanists or architects and they're trying like, how do we fix a place? And what we say is really just figure out how to make it feel romantic. The places that we love in the world are the places that we go take our pictures in, people propose in, they're the places that the couples canoodle in. And we know if you ask somebody, what would you do to make this space romantic? They would say, I'd put string lights out. I would have a little stage. We could have somebody play music. I have beautiful seats over here. I'd probably have some landscaping in this area. We know how to make places beautiful on our own. So make that challenge to yourself in your own community. How do I make this romantic? And I guarantee you, like when I was in Edmonton, Canada for their Winterfest a month and a half ago, I was like, there is a romance to being a winter city. There's ice skating outside. There's hot chocolate. They're sitting around a fireplace. There's a romance in a rural community where you think about people lining hay bales together and creating these beautiful seating areas and creating things out of horse troughs and coming together. Every area has its own interesting little romantic appeal. How do you really game that and amp that up so people can be a part of that environment? This is a group that had just, it was older women in the neighborhood that were part of a knitting group. And they're like, what can we do to help things? And so we had them make the giant like welcome to Cuyahoga Falls sign on, and plaster it over this is all quilts, over a 3-story parking garage. And now we've got our own office. We have a facility. We have about 8 employees in Dallas and a couple full-time in Akron, Ohio. That's kind of our sister city. We do projects all over the country and actually all over the world. So at our office, though, the nice thing is we're able to now start getting into to new ways to start rapidly fixing spaces. One of the things I found was there's only so many pallets I could find. There's only so much hay. There's only so much soil. Like, what are other tools and resources we can start using to help people start fixing these spaces? Because when you're fixing things at a block level, that's a lot of things you have to fix. We started getting into digital fabrication, realizing we can model streets with kids in neighborhoods, and we can and with 3D printers, and then we can start using CNC routers. We have a 4x8 CNC router at our office. Anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's basically a giant printer with wood. Right? So imagine using 4x8 sheets of plywood and being able to cut it out into shapes and notch it together. The inspiration came from this. When I was in Scotland, I worked with a group called WikiHouse, and they were building houses with this. They were cutting out plywood, not using glue, screws, or nails, and just assembling it together like puzzle pieces and making houses. And I thought, if you can make a house, you can make everything that goes in between a house. You can make the benches and the bus stops and the planters and the directories and all of those things. So now if you go to our website, we actually have, we've got about 20 designs, and we're adding new designs every week that you can go and download. You can go to a makerspace in your community. Most communities now have these. Are basically libraries that have tools, right? So you go there, you can get some sheets of plywood, go to the website, and it's free. These are just a few of the designs we've done so far. We've got seating, we've got benches with plants in them, we've got ottomans. This is an example of a chair that we've designed that you can cut the wood a certain way so the wood bends. So this is what's called a kerf cut, or a living hinge. This is what it looks like on the plywood. You put it on the sheet. I go to lunch, come back, and I get that chair at the end of it that can be assembled in about 5 minutes. This is instructions. We try to make everything almost IKEA-like. So it's so simple that you guys can put this thing together. We've got coffee kiosks, flower kiosks. This is a coffee kiosk that we've designed that you guys can go download, assemble with plywood, and fill in your local park. This is the table and chairs that go with it. That's 2 sheets of plywood. We make most of the designs. The kiosks are more complex, but most of the designs are made so an 8-year-old can assemble it in 10 minutes. So this is a bench we have. This is a group of 8-year-olds in St. Paul that helped us build an outdoor theater. That's right. There's that. Good eye, good eye. All right. We started looking at, we could also do our own street designs as well, recognizing that, how do you create bulb outs and how do you create pedestrian islands? So this was us testing out some designs at our office here. The amazing thing was with this project, we created these because I got tired of hauling around straw wattles, construction sites. And I thought, how can I rapidly start building these kind of things? In Austin, a child was hit by a car. Fortunately, was not killed, but was injured. They went and downloaded our product and started infilling their neighborhood streets with the bulb outs and with the pedestrian islands. Shortly after that, to show people how we can make the places better. And sure enough, the traffic slowed and showed how people can make these things work. Again, our big thing, and my big piece of this was recognizing that, like, we can't be everywhere to fix these problems, but maybe we can give people the tools and resources so they can fix them themselves. And which is the charge of our organization, is to keep creating more things to make it easier for people to understand these problems and make things better in their own neighborhoods. Because I guarantee you, everyone knows there's something wrong. They just don't know what it is. They're like, I don't know what it is, because we've been like frogs in boiling water. We've just had this environment change on us over 50 years. And at this point, people are like, man, what is wrong with this space? We're trying to figure out recipes or simple ways that people can say, okay, you can download, we've got sections on, like, this is street treatments. These are treatments for your lots that are empty. These are treatments for your empty buildings. Like, trying to get people to kind of look at these spaces and figure out the options that they have that they can fix these things. And that Better Block project that we started back in 2010, just because I wanted to have a cup of coffee in my neighborhood and get a bike lane, started going all over the country pretty shortly afterwards. In fact, Oklahoma was one of the big states for us. There are, I think, about 4 or 5 projects. If there's any from Typros here at all, a couple of people. So you guys have been involved with several Better Block projects. We did a project at Kendall Whittier up the street here together. That was actually just supposed to be a training session. And it was the fastest Better Block that's ever occurred. It was like a 3-day training session that turned into a live project. Somebody came out and said, hey, I can go ahead and make a pop-up record store. Somebody else made a pop-up like clothing space. We brought in food trucks, and it was an active and working street in no time. In fact, that was the first time to test out reverse angle parking in Tulsa, from what I understand. The engineer was nervous about that concept, and from what I understand, now you have 100 reverse angle parking spaces downtown. So really interesting to see how these things took off. Chuck and I were having this conversation as well. Like the beauty of open sourcing these ideas was like, we're not the experts. Like everybody else is doing these things, and we're learning from everybody else and creating more libraries and more resources to grow these things. So and this map has now grown even exponentially. In fact, I'm gonna be in Kansas City a couple of weeks. They've got a couple better blocks happening there. Again, I'll be in Perth, Australia, doing a better block in June, and then I've got one going on in Lisbon in June, and also in Copenhagen in September. So they are all over the place. We can't even really keep up. In fact, I remember when they started going to Tehran, Iran. At that point, I was like, okay, like Tehran, Iran's calling me, asking me about breaking laws. I was like, I don't know about breaking laws in Tehran, Iran. I think the stakes are a little higher for you guys. All right, we'll go back to the streetcar story. This is my little group of my merry band of our nonprofit, 3 of our 5 members. We had raised about $5,000, which we spent mostly on buttons and t-shirts. This is us in Portland studying their streetcar infrastructure. We came back home, we were fired up. We want to do this, it's gonna take us 15 years, but let's start applying for grants. Found one grant called the Tiger Grant. We were told it's gonna take you, you got a 0.3% chance of getting any money whatsoever. We went to the city of Dallas, said we want to apply for this, but we're not going to apply if DART's applying because it's our rapid transit, then we won't, they'll take them over us. And DART was like, we don't have anything that's shovel ready, which was what was required. So we said, hey, our project's shovel ready, which it was not. But when you do a feasibility study, you can say a lot of things. So we filled this out, 0.3% chance of getting any money whatsoever. And what happened was we won millions of dollars. Instead of taking 15 years to bring our car back, we were able to do it in 5 years. So if you go to my neighborhood now, thank you. 2 of my dearest friends, Sylvia and Luis Salcedo, SGI Group, civil engineers that were big parts of this project. Again, I tell people all I did was build a website. And there's a couple of people in my neighborhood who can tell you, if you go to where the streetcar is now, everywhere that lines it, you can, right now there's cranes everywhere. There's buildings happening. There's an old dairy that got taken down. They're building a mixed use project. There are 3 mixed use projects happening at the terminus of this space right now. There's an apartment complex that just got built. There was other apartment complexes that got built. But I would say even the exercise of putting together this process of saying we want to bring back a streetcar. My friends have a popular restaurant called Bowls in our neighborhood. And they said they took the newspaper to their investment bankers. They're like, hey, the neighborhood's coming together and wants to bring a streetcar back. And they said that was enough to get actual dollars from the north side of town to come in and help them get their restaurant off the ground. So the point is, these things that you do, even had it been a failure, it would have kicked off so many things that were important for our own community. So these are worthwhile projects. The example of some projects that have taken off, this is Zhang Triangle. That was one of the early ones from the project. A group called Civitas helped fund this, great friends of mine. And this is a project that's online. We started a restaurant with friends. So if you go to my community, please come to my neighborhood, go to Oddfellows, you'll put my kids through college. But same process, it's my Better Block team that helped do this. We did this, we did it for about 1/3 of the price of what most restaurants cost, and we had it open within 4 months, which is a crazy timeline for a restaurant. But we're just trying to figure out, can we make this happen? So, the nice thing is whenever I'm on the business side of the equation, now I can fight for things. We have we took away the only parking space in the city of Dallas to turn it into bike parking, which so if you go now on any given weekend, there'll be 10 parking spots. City of Dallas is trying to take that away from us right now, but fortunately we're getting that fought. But just an example of things you can do whenever you understand how this environment is. We also worked to get the sidewalk widened on the left side of our building here. If you see this picture, it was about 3 feet wide. Now, if you go there, it's about 8 feet wide. So we actually took parking away and got a bulb out made in the back and had a second bulb out made over here. And I can tell you, we're losing parking. We're being told that there's a parking problem. We're losing parking, but I can show you my books, and I am showing an increase in business of easily 20% a year. So with each parking space, I try to make that equation so people see why this is important. So a lot of things started happening after that Better Block occurred. So the amazing thing is I got to lecture at Harvard. I decided to run for US Congress because I had a spare April. I got to have dinner with Michelle Obama. We got in the Venice Biennale, which is like the Oscars for architecture. So all my friends that were architects were like, hey, man, that's not cool. And I remember thinking at the time, like, man, what can stop us? We found all these great things to make things happen, really. We've gathered our community, we've given them a few tools and resources and come up with some simple frameworks to make things happen and make change. Like, what can stop us? But the one thing that stopped me completely in my tracks was in 2012, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And then everything stopped. And I remember thinking at that point, like, what was all this for? Why are we doing these things? I'm not going to get a chance to see my streetcar. I'm not going to get a chance to see these businesses start growing. We're helping seed. We're not going to see this infrastructure projects. And when I was at my sickest, my neighborhood came out and started taking my son fishing, taking my daughter to the mall to go shopping, filling up my fridge with food whenever I was on the ground and couldn't do anything. And then when I needed the most help, they started doing Build a Better Jason campaigns to help raise money. So at the end, this is what I tell people, what I got out of all of this work was a neighborhood. And that's what we're doing all of this for in the end. We talk about form, we can talk about design, we can talk about streets and scale, but what everybody wants is a neighborhood. They want a place for their kids to feel safe. They want a place that they can walk to and have a cup of coffee. They want to celebrate, they want to make out, they want to just eat, they want to live life. They want to experience something together. And we all have a part in that equation. And we know how to make great places. We've just forgotten. We need to go together and figure out ways to make this happen, and we don't have a lot of time. We should do this as quick as possible. So how do we do things? I've got 3 simple rules I show everybody all the time to make things happen. First of all, show up. Show up to every meeting. I was a part of the Oak Cliff Chamber, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club. Found out if you don't show up, she will, and she's opposed to everything. That lady's in my neighborhood. I can tell your name. Give it a name. And so the other interesting thing was my friend, Jim Lake, his father bought this cluster of buildings in our neighborhood. His name is Jim Lake Sr., and he just gave it a name. Anyone who's been to Dallas, if you've been to this cluster of buildings, it's called the Bishop Arts District. All he did was give it this name, and it became this place now. All of a sudden, it's something people could fight for and could rally behind. And the other interesting thing is you go back there, it's only about a block and a half. It's not big at all. But what that little block has done, to transform the perception of safety in our neighborhood, for home sales, for creating a place that people can walk and bike to, has been exponentially amazing. We created Art Conspiracy, bike-friendly Oak Cliff. We went all in with good design. That's important. And then last thing I said, set a short date and publish it. We call it blackmail yourself. So what we'll do is we'll work on a poster. We'll make the poster great. We'll spend all this time on this. And then we're going to say, hey, we're going to do a Better Block project in 90 days. And people are like, well, how are you going to do that? Like, I have no idea. But the amazing thing is people start calling us because we've put a beacon in the night and say, hey, I want to take part. I've always wanted to open my own coffee shop, or I've always wanted to work on bike lanes, or I wanted to fix the bus stop in my neighborhood. So we start assembling the team kind of backwards in the process. And in short order, we start making things happen. And part of that I learned was to make things happen, first of all, you create that short date because we want to create all kinds of worst case scenarios. We want to come up with all the reasons why we can't do things. And so whenever you cut that timeline in half, you don't have time to think about problems. You only have time to work. And I learned that really because I would have my house be a mess at times because I've got 2 kids and they can just turn it upside down. You guys know what this is like. And I remember thinking it's going to take me weeks to clean this up. Man, this is a mess. Then I realized all I had to do was pick up the phone and call my friends and say, hey, I'm having a dinner party in 4 hours. And it was amazing how fast I could clean that house. You get ultra efficient, all problems go away, and things are working again. So, and then we found out with the streetcar too. We were told it's going to be a minimum of 15 years. The city somehow figured out how to do it in 5. Beyond that too, we got a 0 cut away from our budget as well. So what did they do? They decided with our streetcar was the first in the nation that they loaded it up with batteries. So they could do away with some of the cantilevered electrical overheads for half of the route. So the part over the bridge, which is about a mile in my neighborhood. So this innovation, which actually helps and now is spurring off other interesting hybrid streetcars around the nation, started in our community based on the fact that we had to take away a 0. And I found out with those 3 things, you can pretty much change everything. Thank you guys.
We've got 2 minutes. Does anybody have a quick question for Jason, please?
I'm on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board in Wichita, Kansas.
Well, I'll be there soon.
Okay, well, that project caused a little bit of consternation.
Really? What was it?
Oh, just, people unhappy on the advisory board. And so, there's a merry prankster monkey wrench aspect to everything that you're talking about here. And you give it a great positive spin. You bring the city leaders out and they're converted to it. how often have you run into, people who are saying, what are these people doing with their toilet plungers? Just going out there, solving the problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. So how many times do you run into people getting frustrated with this kind of guerrilla activity happening in to go transfer these spaces? I will say that the advantage that we found through this process is we go in with every Better Block project and we say, look, we don't know if this is going to be the answer to fix all the problems, but we need to do something. Let's just take some time and temporarily make changes to the built environment to see if it's going to improve it. It might be Carmageddon. It won't be Carmageddon, but it might be. But it's a weekend. So let's see what happens. The interesting thing with that Wichita project, were you there? We did 3 different treatments on that. We did a regular Shero, we did a regular painted bike lane facility. Then we did on the other side of the street a buffered facility. And we were told you'll never get buffered facilities. They would never go for that. And that was what was voted for the most out of that advisory committee that helped take part in that project. They're like, after testing it and getting a chance to try this out, we'd much rather have this. Yeah, I would say, again, I think it's the temporary nature makes it to a point that allays people's fears. Will you have people be upset about it? I mean, the hard part, I will say, by doing things temporarily, like the Detroit project I showed you with the toilet plungers, that was supposed to be up for 10 days. The city liked it so much, they kept it up for 2 months. And so we had not built it in a way to plan for 2 months. So I had to go back with baseball stripers and all kinds of stuff because we use white duct tape, which doesn't hold up so well when it rains. So yeah, it's been a learning process. And again, I think going in there with a little humility and saying, this may not work at all. I would say getting people together to fix problems is always going to be a good thing. Yes?
One more. Now that you're legit, do you get permits and insurance and all that stuff?
Yeah, and well, so here's the interesting thing. Yes, absolutely. And because I now have staff, and so I'm accountable. Okay, the question is, now that we are a legitimate organization, we're no longer this guerrilla organization, do we get permits and insurance? We do. But I will say this, every project, there's pieces of this that are still rogue or guerrilla, just for our own kind of, to keep us excited and fired up, because after you do these things so much, you're like, man, I want to try something different. So the toilet plungers was just a random thing where I was like, look, I'm going to come up, I had the idea in my mind for years, and I was like, just try this out. And so it was, it was a lot of fun to kind of apply those ideas. That was not sanctioned. I also say this too, when you do these projects, I have to be very vague when I go, because I will tell you, the people that will say no, the fire department and the police department will always say no. And I've just gotten used to it when I have these meetings. And so first of all, I don't like to show plans at all. And I tell people, when you start to talk about what you're doing, be as vague as you possibly can. Because if you tell them, hey, if you ask the question, can I put a 12-foot tall tree in the street? They'll say, there's nothing on the books. I'm not sure, so no. So I just say, hey, we're going to create shade. That's it. No idea what that's going to look like. I didn't tell you where it was, but we'll make it happen. And I will say this too, we get told no on a lot of things and we just do it anyways. I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm just saying in general, like, look, we've been through this process enough. Everyone still to this day thinks that it's going to be, they assume, especially when you start working in the street, that people are going to forget how to drive and just going to barrel through, and there's going to be like projectiles everywhere and there's blood in the streets. We did a project in Ross Avenue in downtown Dallas, which is like a 5-lane road, really wide street in our city. Downtown, we put a market in the middle of the street inspired by La Rambla in Barcelona. And we had to get, I think, 15 police officers that were required by the city because they thought, again, people are going to just barrel through this market in the middle of the street. This won't work. Well, what happened was it was hot out, A, and B, all the police officers started going in their cars and sitting in there because it was too hot for them. They would rather be in their AC. And so it showed it worked just fine. Traffic went through. There was no problems. People understood what was happening. But again, our innate fear is that when we start messing with streets, it's going to be this blood on the highway kind of stuff. All right. Thank you, guys.